Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Daily Detroit. It is Wednesday, July 12th, 2023. I'm Jer Stays, and across the table from me is...
Norris Howard.
Good to see you, sir. It's a great Wednesday to spend with you.
Yeah, man. Dogs are barking, birds are chirping, cranes are craning. It's the sound of progress in Detroit.
Right? It is a busy news day, and I think we're going to focus on a little bit of listener feedback. We're going to talk about, of course, I think we have to talk about Harper, actor running for Senate. And we will start with something that I didn't think was going to be a top issue like at this particular moment, but it became one because we're going to start talking about marijuana in the city of Detroit. Now, if people remember, I'm going to set the table a little bit before we get into this. Back in 2018, the state legalized recreational marijuana. It overwhelmingly passed in the state by like 10 points. But here in the city of Detroit, the measure was like 69 or 70 in favor of legalizing marijuana, sending a pretty clear signal about what some folks want. The newest is that there have been some issues around finding places for these businesses to open in the city of Detroit. We have had Councilman James Tate on the show a couple of times talking about the process, and him and the mayor's stated goal to try to make sure that the licenses and the businesses are inclusive, and some of the people who lost out during the war on drugs, who were victimized during the war on drugs, end up getting some of the benefits. Well, this process has resulted on the ground in that it is now 2023. There are some places open, but it is definitely nowhere near what was originally promised or thought about. And then Bridge Detroit's Malachi Barrett says that the council president pro tem is delaying a vote on cutting the distance between licensed marijuana businesses while colleagues asked to make changes. Tate says that cannabis is, quote, the potentially most polarizing issue in Detroit. For context, there is a barrier that they set that you have to be 1,000 feet from various kinds of other establishments to set up a recreational marijuana business or other kind of licensed businesses. Also, there are no consumption lounges in the city, while the first consumption lounge in the state opened up in Hazel Park. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack. It continues on. It is something that has people feeling a lot of ways. Norris, your first thoughts.
I feel this is a very disappointing move from the president pro tem. Obviously, I believe that there are rules in place that probably could be relaxed a little bit because this is the largest market for this particular good. To say that Detroit would not be the largest marijuana market around, at least in Metro Detroit, is silly. And the people want this. They voted in an absolute majority in the city for this. What is happening right now is literally against the will of the people. And I am not a major smoker. To say I've never smoked would be a lie, but I'm not a major smoker. But at the same time, this is what the people want. And I think one of the huge things here that I'm not quite understanding is it would be wonderful if Detroit had large swaths of vacant commercial corridors across the neighborhoods and they say, oh, wait, we do. And so that's the part that's not connecting well for me, because there are miles and miles of light commercially zoned areas in the city of Detroit along 6 Mile, 7 Mile, Schoolcraft, Plymouth, all these major east-west roads, some of the major north-south roads on the west side. There's places on the east side. All these places have space that these businesses could go that wouldn't be next to schools or churches. And the main thing for me is if your church has not been open in 20 years, I don't care. It's not a church anymore.
I will say this. In a previous article, there's a quote from Perfecting Church pastor Marvin Winans, who, by the way, owns that church. It's been more than a decade, I think almost 20 years coming together. And there's been a back and forth in the city as far as permitting or if they're going to get it done. In fact, recently there was a settlement. People may have voted for recreational marijuana, but didn't vote to have it in their backyard. Also, please remember that many people did not support this ballot initiative, and our voices matter too.
With all due respect, Pastor, that's not how votes work, right? You lost the vote, and therefore the will of the people is that this is what should happen. And there are many laws that I disagree with. But if the will of the people says that this is what they want to be legal, then that's what should be.
See, my first blush reaction to this, knowing the power, and here's the thing. if you come to operate in Detroit and you don't understand the political power of the Christian and pastor community in the city, you don't know Detroit. I'm going to start that right there. Regardless if one of us or the other of us agree with anything, if you don't understand, respect, and work with that power, you don't know Detroit.
I'm going to say some things, and I'm going to just be very frank here, is that Councilman Tate's district, District 1, has arguably the largest church community in the city within it, which is Greater Grace Temple in the northwest side of Detroit. So understanding that climate and understanding that he probably doesn't want to run afoul of that community, that could lead into the decision making on why the council's been dragging their feet on this. And I'm not trying to put words in the councilman's mouths. I'm just adding the math together where the math exists.
And those churches are in all kinds of council people's districts. And here's the thing. They reliably vote and they reliably give money. People, I hate to say this, but people in their 20s in the city don't do that.
Well, they have no money to give.
They have no money to give. But like it's a calculation of you go where you know the votes are going to be.
Right.
And that is the situation. Now, I think this ties into a lot of issues. And for me, I think the biggest thing behind this is NIMBYism, because NIMBYism can happen in the city. I know NIMBYism happens in the city and in the suburbs.
Yeah.
And that is not in my backyard. And there's a lot of people out there, I think, who are all for weed, but they don't want to see more weed shops. So I want to share a couple of pieces of feedback from our inbox and social media, because this went farther than I thought it would, because I just kind of thought it was an in-between situation. So in the inbox from Xavier, that tweet about the weed in Detroit, talk about that. You want to know why young people leave? F that study that looks like Kristen Bell's dinner table. Right here, we voted for it. We won. Give it to me. Now, he's referring to that Michigan youth study. Now, I know there's a variety of people on there, but I understand that you believe it looks like Kristen Bell's dinner table. The sentiment is heard, Xavier. It is heard. You are heard. But others had other ideas. So Serena Maria 36, Serena is actually the editor of Eater Detroit, does a lot of good work over there, says, quote, some of these inner ring suburbs are already inundated with weed stores. Just go up West Jefferson and River Rouge. It's the Green Mile with cannabis stores on almost every corner, parts of Ferndale too. I know there was a tweet out there somewhere where someone from Hazel Park, one of the elected officials, talked about how they were very glad that Detroit's continuing to basically fumble this and that it's funneling a lot of tax money to Hazel Park. And honestly, when I talk to people in the neighborhood, there is that mixed feeling, and there is definitely a generational divide. The elders feel a lot different than younger people.
Yeah, I think also you see the suburbs inundated with those weed shops because they're not allowed in the city yet. And that's the thing, is that I'm not saying that those shops would all of a sudden close down once things open up in the city.
Have you met Southern Oakland County? There's a lot of weed.
That's what I'm saying.
Have you met Ferndale?
That's what I'm saying, is that had the premises or had the situation in the city been more amicable towards opening up recreational shops, then I don't think you would see the same level of saturation that you see in those inner ring suburbs. Why? Because River Rouge is right next to parts of west side of Detroit. Ferndale is right next to northwest Detroit.
You got stuff on the Grosse Pointe border, like that giant place right over there off of Mac.
Right next to the Jefferson Chalmers neighborhood in Detroit. Why? Because they're trying to capture these areas of the city that have a lot of people that want to buy weed but can't buy weed in the city recreationally. So if you would have allowed that situation to happen in the city, I don't think we see the same level of saturation in those places. So that's point one. Point two, I think, going to your talk about NIMBYism, is we can't have it both ways in the city. And here's what I mean by this. And this is something that I'll say towards the citizenry, is that to a certain extent, we have to understand that if we want businesses, and this is not just about weed, but if we want businesses to grow and flourish, we can't always have this sort of cloistered feeling about everything, right? There's liquor stores everywhere, literally everywhere. And no one talks about the seedy elements of liquor stores in the same vein.
I mean, I would say some do.
Some do, but not because they've just, quote unquote, always been there, right? It's a thing we've grown to accept. I'm not necessarily seeing that energy that people have of just, it's always there, so, there's nothing I can do about it. We're not seeing that with weed. People are saying, oh, we need to nip it in the bud and stop it before it happens. And for me, the weed shops offer, at bare minimum, jobs for the area, ability to provide a good that the people voted for, and the ability for some of these areas to begin to get some form of economic revival. And I'm not saying weed is the end all be all answer for that, but I'm saying it's a start. And we have the commercial corridors to do it to where we don't have to plop it literally in somebody's neighborhood. We don't have to do that. If you put a marijuana shop on 7 Mile and Myers, right? Okay, there you go. That's not in anybody's neighborhood. It's not really bringing any more seedy elements than a liquor store would have. And you're helping to provide more jobs for that area. So I don't necessarily see this NIMBY issue when the city itself was built in a way to have these sort of self-sustaining commercial corridors per neighborhoods. I don't see it.
See, I think that there have been some opportunities missed. I think there's two different markets we're talking about here. We're talking about the city itself market, which I completely agree is large. But, on background, when I talk to, and we've had various industry experts on this show before, the door's already gone when it comes to being the regional hub of weed in Metro Detroit, because these other areas have already sunk in and they've put in their roots. And there are various stores already in the city, but there's enough people who are saying, we have enough of them, we don't need more. And I look at those areas like Hazel Park or whatever, and it's like, all right, they might end up being the place for this industry. And that a lot of investors who would be doing something, especially in a contracting industry, they're just not going to care about the city. Like, they're done. And it's similar to the same thing that I hear. Most business owners that are friends of mine, they will never invest in the city because too much red tape, too much trouble. I was just talking to somebody else who's going to be doing a thing in Ferndale. They would never consider the city in a million years.
And that's the thing that I think is directly lays at the feet of the city council. Because you talk about the red tape. If this is something that the people wanted and voted for, and the city council would have said, all right, now it's time, here's the rubric, go and find your buildings, find your spaces, and let's bring the businesses here. I don't think we're in this situation. So to that point, from the business community, I do somewhat understand because it is difficult to start that kind of business here in Detroit. But I think also we're kind of missing one of the underlying points here, which is the ability for African Americans and people who've been affected by the war on drugs to be able to become, for lack of a better term, profiteers of the industry, right? And I think if you allow that context to happen, if you allow Black-owned marijuana shops to be able to be opened up in the city, I do think that there is a market, a large market, that would want to patronize that kind of business. I'm not saying that it all of a sudden becomes McDonald's of weed, not at all. But I am saying that those businesses could open up in certain areas of the city and they could be successful. And I think the city should be doing a lot more in order to make those businesses a reality.
Well, I think that was part of the idea of closing this gap as far as geography. I think it's a step forward in that direction, but seeing it get delayed again, it's like at some point do you just go, I just can't put my money there.
I mean, at what point do the citizenry, and again, I'm not a legal expert, and I'm definitely not an expert in, what powers do the people have in order to do something like this, but at what point does the citizen say, all right, it's been almost 5 years now, and you haven't done anything towards this besides voting this person out or a recall election or something like that? And I'm not saying that this is deserving of that, but this is a very clear thing that the people voted for, and it is simply not being done. Very clear. This is not a plurality issue. So I'm a little bit confused as to why the city council continues to drag their feet on this. And at this point, I just hope it's not too late, because this industry may pass the whole city by, even though people have voted to want to make money off of this. And that is the part that's frustrating.
Tip my hat when it's time for the kill. Ain't no beast when you're really real. I am the boss, I am the Don, I am the one they call Lucky Charm.
Something that had been long rumored was going to happen. And frankly, when I was up at the Mackinac Policy Conference, I had the idea this was going to happen because, well, I actually took a photo of Hill Harper walking up a hill. And that's right, actor Hill Harper is running for U.S. Senate officially. He made the announcement this week in Cadillac Square. Fancy campaign video, t-shirts, all the things, like the full-on energy was out there. Very polished delivery. But he's going into a very crowded Democratic primary field with odds-on favorite U.S. Rep. Alyssa Slotkin. This is going to be an interesting battle. Slotkin's raised more than $2 million and has a lot of backing from various party members, and frankly, for a number of reasons. Other entrants include Nasser Beydoun, Zach Burns, former state rep Leslie Love, and Michigan State Board of Education President Pamela Pugh. He points to the fact that he is both a business owner and a card-carrying union member. He's setting himself, and we can discuss all this, but I'm setting the table here, setting himself up that he is on the progressive side of things. He has never run for office before, though has done nonprofit and some activism work. Like he did some stuff with Barack Obama and things like that. Harper says there are, quote, too many career politicians, unquote, and that the delegation the Washington, D.C. needs is with more diversity. He said that in an interview with Time. We will discuss all of this, but I will say this right now. Both candidates are, of course, always welcome.
I would love to
Daily
talk
Detroit.
to both of them. I would love to talk to specifically Slotkin and Harper. Obviously, the field is much larger than that.
I did a flash poll in our newsletter. Slotkin is up 2-1 in the people who are going to be voting in the Democratic primary. There's about 13% for someone else. 70% of our audience are Republicans, so they will not be in that. And then a good 10% won't be voting at all. So as far as head-to-head, Slotkin's 2-1 over Harper in our little unscientific flash poll. I have so many questions.
Yeah, I think the biggest question is why now and why for this particular office? I feel I'm on the representation part, obviously, as an African-American, as somebody who grew up here and loved the fact that I can almost, without doubt, count on being represented in Washington. I feel like it's a really large first step. I mean, it kind of doesn't get
This man
larger.
runs for council, he's in.
Yeah, you run for council. Even in my opinion, if he ran for state house or state senate,
Shree won.
Shree won. I think it's a shoo-in for state rep or even state senate. I think the thing for me, and I love Hill, word to roasting plant, but one thing that I'm concerned about is Slotkin's experience in Washington, not just as a politician, her experience in foreign policy and security, her experience also here in the state as being somebody who can toe party lines and actually can reach across the aisle a little bit and secure some of those more rural counties and secure some of the exurb counties for the Democratic seat. I think that is going to be incredibly difficult for somebody like Hill to win because I think leaning too heavily into either side is still pushing away a lot of people. Obviously, we talk about how polarized political discourse is. I think there are way more people in the middle than anybody is willing to admit.
We're so far out from this. There's so many people are going to be tuning in 2 weeks, 4 weeks before this thing, right? We're in junkie territory right here. We're in political junkie territory.
Right.
So there's a couple of contexts. I agree with all your points about national security. I can't help but think about Carl Levin and the important role he played on armed services. U.S. Senate's so much different than House. Senate is a job of gravitas. It is a job of getting federal resources to people who need it, right? In the hands of communities. It is not an on-the-ground position as much. It is much more, you are going to be dealing with things like Iraq.
Yep.
When that came up, or you're going to be dealing with Ukraine. You're going to be dealing with Senate is a different ball of wax than even a House rep or something on the state level. And I also want to know more for both of them. I want to know more about why you're doing it. Why you? Why now? And are you doing it for you? Are you doing it for us? Are you doing what are your ideas? Because I think that although the fancy stuff matters and the polish matters, I would like to think there are still a lot of people out there who want to look at it and go, okay, what do you stand for? What is it that you want to do? And what is it do you want to do with this seat, right? Because being a U.S. Senator is a different seat than other things.
Yeah, and I love that point that you brought up because being a senator is a national level job. When you're in the House of Representatives, it is a lot more about
it's national, but it's very connected.
But it's about bringing the resources back to your neighborhood, your community, your district. It's about talking to the people who can make jobs happen in this area. Senator to me always came off as more of here's Michigan's opinion on this national issue, right? And so for me, it just feels like a job that has so much less to do with the actual state of Michigan or the city of Detroit and so on and so forth. And so for me, I've always felt like when we're talking about substantive change and change that we can see immediately, I've always felt that state legislature and the House of Representatives is more direct. Not to say that the Senate can't affect change, but it's more direct.
Well, it's part of the whole design of the system.
Right.
A House of Representatives serves 2 years, Senator serves 6 for a reason, to insulate you from the back and forth and the vicissitudes of things. Like if you look into the founding documents,
Right.
there's a reason why they do it that way.
Right. And, for Hill, I respect anybody who wants to get into politics because it's a gritty game and people are going to be incredibly, incredibly terrible to you. And you have to be prepared for that mentally, physically, and emotionally. And so I respect anybody who wants to get into politics on whatever side. But one thing that I think when it comes to Hill Harper that I find to be interesting is he's coming at it from the angle based on, the campaign videos and the announcements and the things he's saying on social media are the angle of, I have this business background. I'm coming from the business community, but I also have this sort of arts union-based background.
Well, not only does he own Roasting Plant, he also owns, I learned this, a number of properties in the city, including that one cow ice cream shop over on that building there. So, to me, I want to see, okay, Roasting Plant looks great there. What about something in that spot? You're opening yourself up to a whole lot of other questions.
Right. That's the thing that I'm curious about is that how are you going to be able to balance this sort of, I know the business world and I understand the plight. I won't say the plight, but the concerns,
yes.
The concerns of the business world and business owner, but I also have this sort of workman union background. And
I just feel like I want to know more.
I think the last thing for me is that when you're looking at somebody like Alyssa Slotkin, who has experience, especially with dealing with some of the more insular communities, especially in Southeast Michigan, and communities that couldn't be more opposite than the population centers of Metro Detroit ideologically, having somebody that has that experience and that know-how and truly kind of comes from that angle in those communities is going to be incredibly difficult to defeat in a statewide election.
And I'm not saying he can't do it, but
I'm not either.
But I don't have proof that he can't.
Right. I'm not saying it either. I'm just saying when we look at the climate of what the state is right now.
And being factual about what the state is, not what we hope it to be on either side.
Being factual, okay? It is a big old blue island down here in Southeast Michigan with a blue dot in Kalamazoo and the rest of it a sea of red. So Michigan is about as purple as it gets in terms of a state. And I'm not necessarily sure that a candidate that is trying to stand on the back of pure progressiveness in the progressive ideals can really get that far in a statewide election.
Do you remember all the hype around Abdul El Sayed some years ago? And then he just got obliterated.
Yep.
And I mean, he does a lot of good work. He's been on the show more than a couple times. He's
Cool
over at
guy,
Wayne
man.
County. I really enjoy him. I think he's a quality individual, at least from what I know of him. He's always been a straight shooter with all my questions. But, you look online and that was the most downloaded interview when I interviewed him for governor and all these other things. But when you got to the voter box, he got obliterated.
Yeah, because coastal style progressivism, I'm not sure works here in the Rust Belt. It is a much more moderate place than people give it credit for.
All right, before we wrap up, a question from the fans, because I know, Norris, you love questions.
I do.
From the fans. And by the way, we heard all of your comments about your thoughts on parking. So I don't even think I need to dive into that. Just we know we made you angry.
Love it.
Tom asks, I noticed you cover both the city and suburbs. What is your thinking on that? There are so many outlets that seem to just cover the city. I mean, I could get really media nerdy here, but do you want to start?
I think it's important. I think obviously based on my feelings just politically in terms of how I view the city of Detroit, I don't think Detroit has enough people or economic power to be able to stand on its own 2 feet right now. And I think that regional participation is incredibly, incredibly important. When you go to any other major city, I literally mean this, any other major city.
And you travel a lot for work.
I do. In the United States, it is a healthy city core that is then fed by its suburbs, right? Not the opposite. It's fed by its suburbs. So in order to have a healthy city, we still need healthy suburbs, period. It's just right now, we haven't necessarily seen that money in the suburbs trickle down into the city. So I think it's still important for us to cover the news in the city because a lot of those decisions directly affect how people view the city and how people spend their money.
It's still the largest municipality, although it is only about 15% of the population, which is very different than when I grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's been so many challenges with that. There's a practical thing. So, and I realized I need to share this because I was out drinking with a listener and he was talking about like Bridge and all these other things. They're all nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
So they all have specific funded missions from foundations or funders or all that other stuff to do specific things. Like Bridge Detroit, for the most part, stays to the city of Detroit. I believe we are all economically connected. We are not a nonprofit. I think we all think, otherwise you wouldn't be here, that there's really a future in podcasts and newsletters for local information. But the reality is that as a media market, it's the 85% suburbs.
Yeah.
And, our listenership is, largest in the city, but our majority of listeners are in the suburbs, accounted together, except for Macomb County. Macomb County, we don't have a lot of listeners.
Yeah, not a lot of love in Macomb County.
But,
what's going on, Warren? Get it together.
Mount Clemens, I know we have listeners out there, but we got to make it out there a little bit more. We're
Yeah.
actually, I think, going to try our best to do Mount Clemens Pride, which will be good.
Nice.
I'm not even going to think. I'm going to say I know because I've worked in the spaces. It is a fact we are all connected. If you think that we are not, you are deluding yourself. You are not telling yourself the truth, whether it's families, whether it's economics, whether it's decisions that are made. Nature doesn't stop at city borders. Money doesn't always stop at city borders. There is the reality. If you look at the SEMCOG predictions, I saw this this morning, thanks to one of our listeners, the city of Detroit's going to continue to lose population through their 2050 estimates.
Yep.
And the green areas are Oakland County.
Yep.
And parts of Macomb and some parts of Wayne. But that's the reality. And you have to be where the people are.
Got fish where the fish are.
There you go. There you go. And we have so many people who believe in that same thing, that we're all connected, because we are. I don't make any apologies for it. I think that it makes for better coverage. I think it adds for perspective. I think putting up walls either way is a dumb idea.
And the last thing I want to say also, Jer, is that I actually appreciate a lot of your coverage of the suburbs, because I think for people in the city, there requires a little bit of humanizing the suburbs. And for people in the burbs, it's about demystifying Detroit. It's about making Detroit not feel like this, crazed hellscape that for some reason people still think it is. And that, there's things to do here. There are people here. There are families here. And there's a lot of energy here. But also at the same time, that not everybody in the suburbs is L. Brooks Patterson.
Really? No, they're not. They're not. So I hope that helped answer your question. I think that there is an important thing to be done for local news and information. I actually think in a lot of the suburbs, there actually are information gaps.
1,000%.
And I think that's part of it too. And part of it is knitting us together, using the internet to create more of a sense of community, because we are so geographically spread. And honestly, Detroit is not alone in this.
No.
So much of America outside of a few cities is geographically all over the place. And so any way we can help bring people together, I think that's part of why I do it every day.
Yep.
All right, we are done for today. Thank you so much for listening to Your Daily Detroit. If you've got feedback, 313-789-3211. Leave a voicemail. Email dailydetroit@gmail.com. With that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Norris Howard.
Remember that you are somebody. We'll see you around Detroit.